Day class. Now let's talk about Chapter 2, Thomas Kuhn. We'll discuss such topics as correspondence theory of truth, paradigm, stages of scientific development, the paradigm shift, scientific tradition and progress, theory-related observations, incommensurability, and other miscellaneous comments. First, in the book The Structure of Scientific Revolutions in 1962, written by Thomas Kuhn, he argued that science evolves, not in a logically linear fashion, but through dramatic shifts in how scientists see the world. He then coined the terms paradigm and paradigm shift. Now, the correspondence theory of truth, what is that? Well, that is the belief that scientific laws and theories are correct insofar as they accurately mirror events in the physical world. So let's look at Thomas Kuhn's take on his view of science. The paradigm. A paradigm is the entire constellation of beliefs, values, techniques, and so on shared by the members of a given scientific community. Paradigms change as observations cannot be explained by the current paradigm based on these anomalies. Science progresses as scientists are forced to change their belief system, which are very difficult to change. So Thomas Kuhn saw several stages of development of science. The pre-paradigmatic stage, many rival schools of explanation clamoring against each other, trying to gather random facts. The paradigmatic stage, science occurs until a new paradigm displaces the old one. So in that paradigmatic stage, what we see is science has matured somewhat. It's going on good until something displaces it. And that's what occurs in the revolutionary stage. A new paradigm displaces another one. So the next two slides are from your previous notes. You may note from the previous lecture notes. So let's look again at how we can compare Popper and Kuhn's view of science. Popper stated that scientific problem solving is a creative activity, unlike the puzzle solving that Kuhn describes it as we'll see a little bit further. Popper's analysis stresses logic and creativity, while Kuhn's analysis of science stresses convention and subjective factors. These subjective factors are things like irrationality, biases, and things of that nature, which did not come into play when Popper viewed his particular certain view of how science progresses. Popper versus Kuhn continue. Popper accepted the correspondence theory of truth, while Kuhn rejected this theory and instead believed that scientists create the reality they explore. So think about what that means. Popper, much more logical, much more linear, that what we see, the correspondence theory of truth is, this is really reflecting what we see in the real world. Whereas for Kuhn, he rejected this. He basically stated that we create our own reality. Paul Feyerabend, which we'll see a little bit later, said that whatever scientific rules do exist, they must be broken in order for scientific progress to occur. And again, more on him later. Traditional aspects of science remain. Empirical observation, which we saw at the very beginning of the course in Chapter 1. Lawful relationships are sought. Theories are formulated and tested, and determinism is going to be assumed. Things cause each other. That there has to be something that causes something else. That we can make that determination as to what those causes are. So we do rely on that quite a bit. So is science objective? Thomas Kuhn challenges the idea that science is objective. Think about what that means. Basically, he's making the statement that what we rely on as scientists to a large degree is our objectivity. He challenges that idea that science is objective. Kuhn, in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, introduces the idea of scientists at certain times in history working in a paradigm. A paradigm, as used by Kuhn, refers to the framework of accepted ideas in which they operate. So the scientists have this paradigm in which they operate and do their research and conduct their work. That becomes their sort of reality. A paradigm might include ideas on truth, validity, and methodology, how research is actually carried out. Kuhn argues that scientists will tend to work within the paradigm and thus seek evidence which supports the paradigm, until such time as anomalies are so strong as to precipitate a paradigm shift or a revolution. A new normal science paradigm is established and the process begins again. Looking at scientific tradition, a scientific community cannot practice its trade or profession without some set of shared or agreed to beliefs. In other words, a paradigm must exist. They speak a common language, share a common perspective, and so on. The basic idea is very simple. For example, most people have some friends or family that may belong to the military or have belonged to the military. And you can see they can get into military speak sometimes, using terms and phrases that they have learned as part of their culture, part of their tradition, part of their education as being a military citizen. But the idea is that people who are not familiar with that don't share that same paradigm, they do not speak or do not understand that language which is shared by those individuals who have that similar paradigm of existence. Scientific progress. How does scientific progress occur? An anomaly. Data that does not fit the current paradigm. An anomaly undermines the basic tenets of the current scientific practice. These tenets and assumptions are no longer working. New assumptions must develop. New assumptions and paradigms require the reconstruction of prior assumptions and the reevaluation of prior facts. This is difficult and time-consuming. This is resisted by the established community. The process is what Kuhn calls a scientific revolution, occurring through a paradigm shift. The emphasis should be made here that it is somewhat of a difficult thing to do. When people have hardcore held beliefs, these beliefs are reluctant to be given up by the persons that hold them. So it will take some time for individuals and the community as a whole to give up their current paradigm for a new paradigm. So how do paradigms emerge? Researchers observe phenomena. Various pre-paradigmatic interpretations emerge and compete. That could be similar to the schools of psychology in its early development, which you'll see a little bit later in the course. One interpretation seems better than the others and gains more and more adherents. That interpretation becomes a paradigm. So you have the old guard, okay? And then you have people who start to question it. At first, those people who are questioning the current paradigm, they'll be dismissed where possible. You did the study wrong. You misinterpreted the results, and so on. They don't have good methodology. But as more and more people, researchers, start to say the same thing, start to say and produce the same types of anomalies, then we start to see more adherents come on board, and then there will be potentially a shift to a new paradigm. A paradigm transforms a group into a profession, or at least a discipline. From this follows the formation of specialized journals, the foundation of professional bodies, and a claim to a special place in academia. There is a growth in publicizing of scholarly articles written by and for professional colleagues who share the paradigm. So the paradigm is created. Once the paradigm is created, then we have a chance for science to mature, for progress to be made. As they're wanting to communicate with each other, they communicate journals, publicize articles, go to conference, and things of that nature for the other individuals, the other professionals who share that particular paradigm. Let's look at an example of a paradigm shift. The earth, the sun, the universe, yada, yada, yada. Okay, we have the geocentric theory. A long time ago, the earth was considered to be located at the center of the universe, and all the planets revolve around the earth. In opposition, we have the heliocentric theory, which proposed the sun was actually at the center of the universe. We know now it's at the center of the solar system, but then it was at the center of the universe. So the sun is at the center of our solar system, or universe from their perspective. The story of the geocentric versus the heliocentric theories. Aristotle, long time ago, proposes a theory. Ptolemy finds data to contrary, doesn't fit with the theory. Ptolemy has two choices: propose a new theory, A, or B, modify the old theory to fit the new data, which he decides to do, to modify the old theory to fit the new data. Copernicus comes up with a new theory, heliocentrism, using exactly the same data as Ptolemy. The model is simpler and explains the data just as well. Using Occam's razor, which basically in a nutshell is the best solution is the simplest solution. Using Occam's razor, Copernicus' model is superior. The idea is resisted because of social concerns and preconceived assumptions. Yet the model is used because of its predictive power, but not adopted as reality. Because the heliocentric model had many things going against it. First, the geocentric model has the long-held traditions of being the current paradigm. There are other political factors that come into play as well. Item number 6, new technology, a telescope. A telescope allows Galileo to make an observation of Venus, moons, of Jupiter, and so on, that are consistent with the heliocentrism, the heliocentric model, and not with the Earth-centered universe model. So now we have something out in the world, so to speak, something objective that can be seen and demonstrated that does not fit the geocentric model, but it does fit the heliocentric model. Heliocentrism is adopted by scientists and eventually by everyone else. But it did have a long time, centuries, for that to occur, for there to actually be a shift from the geocentric model to the heliocentric model. Why was all the issue with this? Well, there were several. One in particular, let's look at Galileo. Galileo made a mistake. His findings, using his telescope and doing his calculations, he published them. He made it so people could see them. The public had access to them. That caused an issue. At the time, there was this thing called the Inquisition. The Inquisition was a permanent institution in the Catholic Church charged with the eradication of heresies, things that went against the agreed interpretations of the Bible, things of that nature. It turns out that in the 16th century Italy, the Copernican proposition that the sun is the center of the universe was heresy. It was a heresy because it was interpreted to disagree with some biblical passages. He was taken before the Inquisition. The trial was held and Galileo lost. In fact, he never had a chance. He was put under house arrest until his death in 1642. But it is there that he did arguably most important work by writing up his previous work and developed a whole other way of knowing experimentation. So what we see in this short snippet, and we will revisit this idea again, that scientists and philosophers during previous periods in history had to not only challenge the paradigm that was currently held, but also battle in a way other factors that went on in society at the time, be they political or religious. And this will pop up from time to time as we go through the material of this course. Examples of paradigms in psychology. The Cartesian, after Descartes, or Newtonian paradigm, the person as a mechanism, as a clock, or as a computer. The evolutionary paradigm, the person in change as an adaptive organism in continuity with other species. The ecological paradigm, the person as part of a complex system. Some other major paradigms in psychology, we have cognitive psychology, how we acquire, organize, remember, and use information to shape our behavior. Psychoanalytic theory, feeling, thoughts, and behaviors are shaped by unconscious. Psychoanalysis, being unconscious, bringing unconscious to the conscious awareness to a better understand distress and impairment. Behaviorism, health psychology, there are numerous different paradigms. These are almost like disciplines in a way. They have their own sort of culture, their own sort of speak for those particular areas. So paradigms is an idea that is somewhat universal in many ways. Paradigms just describe this culture held by a group of people. In this case, a culture that is indicative of people who study developmental psychology, studying of the continuity and change across the lifespan. Now, let's look at theory-laden observations. We have a Necker cube and duck rabbit. These are gestalt shifts, or slight illusions in a way. With the Necker cube, we see this cube that seems to be three-dimensional, even though it's a two-dimensional surface. We see the duck rabbit, where we look at it, it can appear as a rabbit. It also can appear as a duck. Theory-laden observations. A theory-laden observation is basically saying this. We observe things. And as we observe things, we need to understand that our observations are not neutral. They're not blank. We don't start with a blank slate. We have information already in us. We have things that may guide us to see one thing over another. All right? So when it comes to theory-laden observations, we see things, we perceive things that may be perceived differently by somebody else who has a different experience set, or who just experienced something differently just a few minutes before. Look at this one. Name the picture. I'll give you a few seconds to look at it. Okay, do you know what this is a picture of, a drawing of? Let me go ahead and let you know. It is a man and a mouse. An old man or a mouse. With the old man, you can see the nose here to the far left, and just above the nose, we see the eyeglasses that he has on, his nice bald head going all the way around to where his ear is, to his chin, and to his mouth. But that nose is the snout and head of the mouse. The eyeglasses or eyeballs are the ears to the mouse, and that head becomes the back for the mouse, and the jawline is the tail. The basic idea here is that there is sensation, then there is perception. Sensation, as you recall, is you using certain sensory receptors in your body, picking up stimuli out in the environment there, and then picking it up. But then you got to make sense of it, and that is perception. Now, let me give you a really quick scenario. I used to do this name the picture scenario in my introductory psychology classes all the time, many years ago. And I would give a lecture, and then I would send out a page to hand it out to all the students. It'd be a little short story there, and they would read the story. Unbeknownst to them, half the students received a story about pest control, and the other half received a story about a nursing home. And then later in the lecture, I would show them this image. And lo and behold, the people who read the story about the nursing home, they tended to report seeing a man, and the ones who read the story about pest control, they reported seeing a mouse. So I was able to show them that they had not a blank slate, but something I had sort of put in there, primed them, so to speak, so that their observations became theory-laden. So theory-laden observations. Observations are affected by the beliefs held by the investigator. According to Kuhn, there are no neutral observations. We observe the world through a filter of our beliefs and paradigms. Evidence, data, observations are the product of theories. Two scientists with differing paradigms will see the world differently. This was a radical proposal then. So, two scientists, two highly intelligent individuals, well meaning, can see the same thing but view it totally differently. And then we have this notion of incommensurability. Incommensurability, the lack of comparability between paradigms based on different observations and rules. Basically, it's this. We have incommensurability because paradigms are so different from one another. They have different methodologies, they have different definitions of things, different views, different ways in which things get done. Because they're so different from one another, according to Kuhn, the paradigms cannot easily be compared to one another. They are incommensurable to one another. They lack comparability. So, commensurable versus incommensurable. Commensurable if scientists can discuss it using a shared nomenclature language that allows direct comparison of theories to determine which theory is more useful, then they're commensurable. They are incommensurable if they are part of a different paradigms with little to no overlap, leading to an inability to permit scientists to directly compare the theories or to cite empirical evidence favoring one theory over the other. What's the point? The point here is this. That is why it may take a long time, according to Kuhn, why it may take a long time for paradigm shifts to occur, for scientific revolutions to be held, to be seen, and to be executed. Simply because when the paradigms are so different, we can't figure out a way to determine whether or not this is better than the other one. A couple of other miscellaneous ideas here. Conventionalism. Conventionalism, what is true or correct is decided by the community, but not by anything in absolute terms. Kuhn is basically saying this, in a large extent, is how science gets done. Conventionalism. It's true or correct. It's the right type of whatever. It's decided on by the community, but not by absolute terms. So, we sometimes miss things right in front of our face. For example, disconfirming evidence. They have an example that was discussed in the book, and I'll go over that real quickly here. A study a long time ago that was done on a college campus somewhere, and they got some students to count the number of times a group of 6 people in a circle had this ball, and they were tossing the ball back and forth in front of each other, catching it, and they wanted to have the subjects count how many times the ball was caught by the participants that they were observing. They did this in a hallway, okay? And so they conducted the study, and then after the study was conducted, they asked them, what about the man in the gorilla suit? And most oftentimes they report, what are you talking about? What man in the gorilla suit? Inattentional blindness is that we do not see something because we're not looking for it. We're not paying attention to it. What they had done during this particular experiment, they had someone dress up in a gorilla suit and walk behind the students who were tossing the ball back and forth toward each other, in plain view of the person at the other end of the hallway who was counting how many times the ball was being caught by the people in the group. But they did not see the man in the gorilla suit. All right, let's look at a few things just to wrap a couple of key ideas up here. All right, scientific revolutions are a rare thing. They're rare for a variety of reasons. It takes a long time for people to give up on something that they believed in for a long time. Paradigms are the way things are, that's the status quo, and people tend not to want to give up the status quo. Normal science is akin to coloring inside the lines, following the rules, not questioning them. Put it this way. Remember Karl Popper, said it's all about falsificationism, that we go and try to prove ourselves wrong. Kuhn disagrees. He's basically saying normal science is just simply coloring inside the lines. Coloring inside the lines as described by the paradigm to which you operate under. When paradigm is accepted, that is when we have a mature science. Scientists do not replicate as much as extend the paradigm. They're just extending, moving the knowledge a little bit further within the confines of the current paradigm. Most science, according to Kuhn, is problem solving within the paradigm. When we do shift from one paradigm to another, paradigms are incomplete, which is important because that gives us enough to work on. It gives us something to do. The paradigm says it explains things better than the previous paradigm did, but there's still lots of things that need to be worked out. And again, more importantly, we do not seek to falsify. That is not our purpose. We tend to reject pesky data that does not fit. This is what happens. We start to first see data being revealed that does not fit the current paradigm. We'll try to ignore it, to rejig the data, figure out why it worked out this way, how those individuals who conducted the study went wrong. Okay, but if the anomalies continue, then they're taking those anomalies more seriously. They may then redefine and alter methods. Our conservatism prevents abandonment of the paradigm. And again, that's our comfortableness with the status quo. This has gotten us so far, we don't want to give it up so soon. So there are many reasons why these scientific revolutions take as long as they do. Now, going a little bit deeper here, one of the things that we'll see a little bit later that Lakatos in the upcoming chapter does not like about Kuhn is that the way Kuhn describes science, it makes things very non-rational. Okay, and for some that's problematic. The non-rational nature of science. First of all, we don't know the ultimate success of the new paradigm. So we have a current paradigm that's just been gotten rid of. We have a new paradigm here. We don't know if it's truly going to be a success or not. We don't know how it's going to turn out. So we're reluctant there. Then we have theory-laden nature of observation. Sometimes, even when there's data that may say that current paradigm that we're operating under is wrong, we may not even notice it. Okay? Not only the theory-laden observations, but also remember the inattentional blindness. There could be data staying right in front of us that could be disconfirming to many of our theories and our hypotheses, going against our paradigm, but we might not even notice it. And then there's the incommensurability of the paradigms. They're so different sometimes that there's hard time to compare them to see which one may be truly more beneficial over the other. And then the theory laden. What is seen equals what we look at and the theories we hold. Perceptions equal what's out there actually in the physical world and other internal factors. For example, how good is your eyesight? You could be looking at the same thing that your friend is looking at. The thing that you're looking at is there, it's legitimate, but your eyesight is poorer than theirs. So that will have some impact on your perceptions. Education changes the way we see the world. Showing one person a piece of paper and they look at it and they see a bunch of squiggly lines on a piece of paper, show it to another person, they see words. Okay, they see a poem. All right, so education will change how you see things in the world. Our perception is our objective reality plus our education and learning. It happens. Now, let me give you a really quick aside. I worked for the Navy for many years ago as a researcher, and I was part of the Human Factors Division. I was an IO psychologist, industrial organizational psychologist, and I worked also with the people who were human factor psychologists. And they were more concerned with human-machine interaction, and at the time, I was more concerned with training and development. And I remember going to this meeting, and we had this meeting with the Navy folks, and we had our meeting after the meeting, and we saw the world totally differently. The human factors people saw the problem as an equipment problem. redesigned the human-machine interface, and the IO psychology, we saw it as a training and development problem. So the idea here is that our perception even of the problem was based on, we both saw and heard the same stuff, but our education and learning and experiences changed what our perceptions were going to be. I, along with my other IO psychologist colleagues, saw it as training development, whereas the other colleagues who were human factors, they saw it as human-machine interaction. Again, the idea is that we cannot separate ourselves from observations. Who we are, our education, our learning will always play some significant role in our perception. So, key things here, real quickly. Remember about inattentional blindness, that sometimes if we don't expect to see something, we may not see it. We're not attending to it. We don't have attention on it. Expectations play a role in our perceptions. What you expect to see sometimes, you will see it. Okay, that's just the way it works. And the key thing to remember about all of this is that we psychologists, future researchers, whatever you're going to become, we're all human, and we're going to be susceptible to the same types of issues that anybody is going to be susceptible to. At least for us, to some degree, we are aware of our potential biases and issues, which gives us puts us a little bit ahead of the game, so to speak. So, the paradigm. The scientific communities rely on the existence of a paradigm. We have the stages of scientific development. Scientists work within the paradigm. There are several paradigms within psychology that we discussed. We talk about the historical examples of a paradigm shift with the Earth, Sun thing. And then we also understand, too, that technology may play a significant role as well. Remember with Galileo, it was the telescope, a big deal thing then, a new technology that helped him to uncover one of the major glitches in the current paradigm to push people toward this newer paradigm of a sun-centered solar system or universe back then. And then we have incrementability. So basically, we see the reasons why we have slow paradigm shifts and slow scientific revolutions. There are so many things, not only the political spirit of the times and religious things that may be going on that will slow the progression of things, but we see all these things together slow it down. Again, it took several hundred years before the geocentric was replaced by the heliocentric view of the universe. So, Popper, falsification is the engine of scientific progress. For Kuhn, people do not behave as Popper would suggest. We don't go about trying to falsify everything that we're doing. Scientific revolutions take a long time. Kuhn emphasizes the idea of irrationality because the ultimate success is not known. We have our theory-laden observations, and we have inattentional blindness, and we have incrementability, all playing into us not knowing what it's going to be like. All of these things influencing how our paradigm may be accepted or whether or not we're going to shift a paradigm. Some of these things have nothing to do with the science itself or what we're studying. And that's the key point that Kuhn is sort of making in a way, that there are factors outside of the science that will determine scientific progress. And this was not communicated at all by Popper in the first chapter. Okay? All right. So, additional comments. Theory-laden observations build a theory guides observations. We can discuss and deliberate, although it may be difficult, according to Popper, by looking at these different paradigms. The myth of the framework regarding incrementability, difficult, not impossible, according to Popper. Okay, so basically what Popper is doing here is taking some shots, in a way, at Kuhn, basically saying theory-laden observation builds a theory, it helps guides our observations. They sort of agree to that. But we can discuss and deliberate enough, even though it may be difficult, we can do this according to Popper. Incrementability is difficult, but not impossible. The major points for his perspective to falsify theory: extend reach of current paradigm, replace based on rationality. Convention, the community decides what to falsify a theory, and science advances based on the rejection of theories. So that's sort of like his take, Popper's take, on some of the ideas of Kuhn here. as well as re-emphasizing some of the focuses that Popper had. When it comes to Kuhn, theory-related observations, a theory guides observations. We can discuss deliberate no common ground, that's for its incommensurability. Major points, anomalies. We reject troublesome observation. If it continues, we may rejig the paradigm somewhat, but the acceptance of a new paradigm does not proceed on rational grounds. Key point, acceptance of a new paradigm does not proceed on rational grounds. Paradigm 1 for paradigm 2 is not rational. Moving from P1 to P2 is not rational. Again, we don't know the success of what P2 is actually going to be ultimately. Theory-related observation and incommensurability. Conservationism, we will not abandon paradigm. We just don't want to do that. We stick to what has brought us there in a way, and that's what that stick-to-itness, that conservatism gets us. We work within the paradigm. That's the sign of a mature science. We extend and deepen the paradigm, not test or try to disprove it. We may engage in complicating theory. Revolutions are rare, but we see a new paradigm is the start, not the end of research. So that's another key point. As one paradigm is put to rest, okay, put aside, the new paradigm arrives. But as it was stated earlier, we still would have a lot of stuff to do within that new paradigm. The biggest blow to logical positivism came not from philosophy, but from a historian of science, and that is Thomas Kuhn, who we talked about. They, Popper and empiricists, ignore many aspects of how science actually gets done. Kuhn held that science should be studied by looking at what most scientists do most of the time. And that is what we saw here. That's how he came up with his view of scientific progress, looking at the paradigm shift, and the revolution, and aspects of irrationality in science.